this is really a great opportunity to hear from two important cities in this city region who are collaborating together to really drive growth through transport connectivity. And I'm going to ask both to talk a bit about that, and then hopefully we'll get time for questions as part of the session. We've heard a lot over the last day or so, and you know, kind of governments looking at all of the commitment to growth and housing, but we've heard a lot about collaboration, I think, at REiiF this year. And we saw the launch of the Great North campaign with the mayors on Monday. We've seen other kind of growth corridors and sort of initiatives that are bringing collaboration between key drivers within regional economies. And that's really what we're here to talk about today, is how Leeds and Sheffield want to really collaborate around transport, but the way in which that will then benefit our economies, but also importantly, and I know this is close to both Ed and Kate's, what difference will that investment make to people and to local communities across Leeds and the broader region, across Leeds and Sheffield and the broader region. And that's another important theme of today, is that in doing a kind of transport connectivity between the two cities, there is a much wider benefit to the whole of the region, and I want to try and draw that out a little bit when we get into the discussion. And we shouldn't really miss the opportunity to have two people who've been senior civil servants in government and are now running cities, to get a bit of a kind of feedback, sort of thoughts on the relationship between local and national government, and kind of how things look from each perspective and how we might work a bit more effectively together. So there's a few things to cover in the discussion. So let's start off with why collaborate, and what do you think the sort of transport corridor approach that we're working on jointly as the two cities, how will that deal with or impact on some of the challenges that each cities face, and what do you see as the opportunities? And I'm going to ask each to comment on that. So, Kate, do you want to kick off?
Thanks, Pat, and thanks so much for chairing, and lovely to see you all. I think that the start point for us is that we're both incredibly ambitious for our cities. We both grew up in and around the cities that we now have the privilege to lead as chief execs. But I think we've also come through, and Pat's alluded to this, an experience of working at a national strategic level. And for me, the biggest driver is, I guess on a personal level, I grew up in South Yorkshire feeling like in order to get on, I'd have to leave. And that makes me furious. It makes me really happy that I'm back, but it also is something that I think we have to change. We have to think about growing our economies so that opportunity is really available to all of the people in our cities and regions, but also that there is that opportunity to kind of retain talent. Equally, I spent, as did Ed, a number of years in the Treasury and saw and see the challenge that our national economy faces. And as far as I'm concerned, there is no way for the UK economy to succeed and to meet its potential until our second, third, fourth cities start to perform at the level that other cities in other countries around the world, in comparable nations, are performing. And so all of that leads me both on an intellectual kind of head and heart basis to say that the absolute right thing is for us as city leaders to be working together to make the case for the sort of connectivity, particularly in terms of transport, but also the sort of investment and focus around our strengths that means that we can perform to our potential. And there is, let's be clear, there is already 50 billion GVA generated from Leeds and Sheffield, but we know that could be increased hugely if we were able to have anything like the sort of infrastructure, not just that other European cities or global cities that are only 32 miles apart have, but frankly other cities similarly distanced in our own country, Glasgow, Edinburgh, dare I say even Manchester, Liverpool. So that's what's driving me, that's the challenge, and I think the opportunity is sort of there for us to take. And Ed and I are both waving our White Rose rail reports, because I think also our collaborations with our regional mayors offer a massive opportunity to really get our voice heard in London and in Whitehall. And with investors as well.
Thank you. Ed, you're newer to this than Kate. Why is this, when you're landing in a big job like this, why is this a priority for you in so early into the role in Leeds?
Thanks, Pat. So I'm 5 months in, and that means I get to say that I'm new for at least another year and a half, 2 years, which I intend to do. It also means I've been around long enough to get a sense of how local government's working and what Leeds' opportunity is. Coming into this job, so I grew up in Leeds, like Kate, growing up in or around the area that we're now responsible for, you really get a sense of arriving into a job like this, where you go, in other jobs sometimes, you're looking over the shoulder at what's next or what else is around. We're not doing that here. All that we want to do is to help our cities to grow and to succeed. When you look at the north, particularly, and you do that, you look at this cluster of cities, and you look historically at the fact that we spent ages kicking chunks out of one another. Today we're talking about Leeds and Sheffield. Tomorrow, Lorraine and I are sitting down to talk about Leeds and Bradford. Sometimes we may even talk about Leeds and Manchester if we have to. But it's a sense of, we all are interdependent on one another. We are close enough to be a city cluster. We all know that. We've been around this 1,000 times, but it remains true. 33, 35 miles between two cities is not much. I have family in Sheffield. My uncle lives there. I've got family in the US on the West Coast, and they would say, 32 miles, that's one city. You could get from one to the other. You would drive around that. This is effectively one economic area. So how do we bring it closer together? Because that's where the big prize is. If you look at Leeds and Sheffield, it's a combined population of about 1.39 million. Add Bradford into that, which is next door to Leeds, you're getting up to about 1.8. Add Wakefield into that, we're over 2. This is a pretty chunky economy we're looking at. I will briefly, and Kate alluded to it, make the Liverpool-Manchester comparison. You may have heard last week a really good and inspiring and thoughtful paper from the two mayors in Liverpool and Manchester talking about Liverpool-Manchester Rail. Doing the comparison of Leeds and Sheffield, Liverpool to Manchester, combined population, depending on how you cut it, of around 1.66 million, although the greater city regions are bigger than that. The daily capacity of the railway between those two cities is 45,000. The daily capacity of the railway between the cities of Leeds and Sheffield is 17,000. We have 1 fast train per hour, they have 4. The opportunity in terms of what we can do if we just make that transport work a little bit better, and as a rail commuter in West Yorkshire, a little bit more reliable, will be huge. Bringing those two cities closer together. Leeds to London, the trains go about 70 miles an hour. Leeds to Sheffield, they go about 32 miles an hour. It does feel different, and it does make a difference. You talk to people who get off the train either in Sheffield and Leeds, which both Kate and I do from time to time. There's a sense of grim survival, that they've somehow made it off the train alive. We've got to bring an end to that. And I think for me, when you think about Leeds' future, it is about all the stuff that we've been talking about today with the football club. And yes, we've had the trophy here and it was great, and the British Library and all the other pieces. But actually, it's really about the interdependence with the other cities and the other economies. And I think for both Kate and I, if we do our jobs right, over the next 5 years, 10 years, we can really take that on a step. And that will mean specifically new opportunities for people growing up in both cities, where they'll think, I could work in Bradford, I could work in Sheffield, I could work in Wakefield, I could maybe even work in Manchester and live in Leeds, or vice versa. That's what's going to make this stick. And we're not far off, but we've got some steps to take.
Okay. Kate, can you draw a little bit more the kind of benefits to the economy, and particularly around sort of productivity and how you see transport supporting that, and where you think, how do you bring transport, housing, skills, all of that together in a kind of joint approach to the benefits of better connectivity between the two cities?
Thanks, Pat. I suppose I'll answer that in a few ways. I mean, I won't labour on the point that Ed's made. There is clearly a huge productivity loss right now to the consequence of anybody who is trying to operate in our region and get around just because of the time spent sat on the train going very slowly or even waiting outside a station. But if we put that to one side, what we are both doing in our cities is really leaning into very ambitious growth plans. And in Sheffield, we've just signed off a 10-year growth plan, cross-party, that's focused on our role as a global leader in a number of areas. And, classic Yorkshire, we don't shout about this, but largest clean energy cluster in the country, huge sovereign capability, which given global instability is hard, but is very, very important. Our advanced manufacturing, our creative and cultural and our healthcare economies are incredibly vibrant and very, very productive. This year alone in Sheffield, we were the 5th in the country. That's the highest in the north after London and the southeast of spin-outs from universities in terms of the capital raised. So we've got those strengths in our places, but we know that in order to capitalise on those, to drive real productivity, we need to be building places and we need to be growing our city in a way that's sensitive, in a way that's future-focused, in a way that's really connected to our response to the climate crisis and the climate emergency. And I suppose what I'd say is in doing that, we could do that in each of our city clusters really, really well. But if we imagine ourselves to be an island, then we miss something really, really important, which is we each have complementary strengths. And if we can make that connectivity work better, then, for example, you know, the health research that's happening in Leeds and the applied medtech and healthcare research that's happening at Sheffield Hallam on the Olympic Legacy Park can connect in a way that, and you can see those agglomeration benefits. If you are able to really make the most of, for example, we both have really vibrant policy campuses, which I always thought should be campi, but campuses of government. So thousands of civil servants in our two cities. In Sheffield, the largest concentration of policy civil servants outside Whitehall, designing policy around welfare to work, skills, health in Leeds, and making it possible for those conversations to happen across our places. So for me, it's about, you start by having really solid growth strategies in your places, but you also are open and willing to discuss the complementarity between them, and then, as we discussed, make it really, really easy for businesses and for individuals to move between the two places.
Ed, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think many of you will have lived through the era with government funding where when we all put forward our local growth plans, everything had to be a life sciences cluster, or before that, everything was a tech cluster. And we all had these thematic focuses, we all did. I think where we are as cities now is a little bit different, where we're recognising different strengths. Now, we do some great manufacturing in Leeds, but we do not have anything like the AMRC, the Advanced Manufacturing Centre. We don't have anything quite like what's happening in Forge Masters in terms of the welding that they're doing there. And we recognise that. And we're not, you know, we are going to do bits of manufacturing, but we're not going to compete on the same scale as Sheffield is. Similarly, the financial services sector here is really humming, and fintech, you know, working well. We had National Wealth Fund, Bank of England, Financial Conduct Authority talking earlier about that. It is really going places. We wanted that to be a magnet for people. Similarly, you know, Jenny's here from the Teaching Hospital. The work that's going on around the health innovation system here, as Kate said, is really exciting. We can really bank on those complementary strengths and also talk up each other's strengths, which feels more radical than it should do. The other bit, though, is also recognising what is similar, and that's excitingly similar. So what Kate mentioned about the Sheffield University spine, which is, you know, truly impressive from a low base, really smashing it on the startup scale-ups, startups particularly. We've got Nexus in Leeds just down the road, which is full of people doing some, I mean, terrifyingly clever things. We have Sheffield Hallam, which is doing amazing stuff in health research and applied health research. Leeds Beckett, the other university here, doing a lot on translating research into practical uses and sort of how it makes a difference in everything from sports science to just about every other industry we've got here. If we can get a really clear sense of what's different, but also where we have common strengths, I think for Kate and I in our jobs, it's helping both sides of our cities to recognise it and respect the differences, and where you've got similarities, bring them closer together. You know, get everyone to just get in a room together and figure out what we could do, and that's part of, I think, what we can do more of.
Well, I think you're building a really powerful story. Both of you actually talked about the complementarity between the kind of two economies and the need to not compete but actually play to your respective strengths. And I think capturing that story and really being very clear about how that works between the two places is really powerful. And I haven't heard that from many cities in the same way. What about from a government point of view? Both of you been in government. How do you get, I suppose, the buy-in from government to this, to the kind of corridor approach? But how do you get government to recognise that not competing but collaborating and sort of investing in a collaborative strategy is the way to go. And where does the combined authority sit within all of that? It'd be good to...
So, I mean, I'm sort of further out of central government now, 4 and a bit years on. So it's I'm allowed to just diss central government as much as I like and not feel conflicted or contradictory. I mean, I think the reason why this job is the best job in the world and why I personally don't think I'll ever want to go back is because at Place everything comes together. And if you're someone who wants to make a difference, but if you're also someone who likes to see a problem in all of its complexity and glory, then actually how the possibility of what we can do in our cities and in our regions feels to me just so much more impactful. So I think what's frustrating is having made that move, seeing how difficult it is to get that sense of connectivity to actual impact with former colleagues. And I don't underestimate, the fiscal challenges are extreme. It is, to call them headwinds is an understatement. And we've gone through decades of Game of Thrones-like competition between one another, to the point where I think the sort of muscle memory of many people in our sector and in our places is to feel that we have to fight tooth and nail and claw to get anything that we need. And actually it takes quite a brave set of leaders, and I think both colleagues at executive level, but also we're very lucky to have a set of political leaders in our cities and in our mayors who I think are talking meaningfully about collaborating to compete and recognising that if we can get to the right people, if we can have the right conversations with central government, this stuff just makes sense. Because really what government should care about is the performance of this whole country. And we are not going to perform as a country if we keep operating on a zero-sum game.
Ed, your previous role in government was quite place-based compared to maybe other colleagues. What's your view on, and you're allowed even 6 months in, I think, to be critical if you really want to. But what's your impression of?
So just to say welcome to Kate and my therapy session as recovering civil servants. It's a real treat. It's nice to have the space. Thank you, everyone. So relatively new in the job. I think sometimes just understanding what it feels like on the other side of the table is important. And I think sometimes as local leaders, it's being really clear on, firstly, what's the big strategic case? So what is the vision? What does it mean? Don't just give me a brochure. Don't just sort of give me a nice picture. Tell me about the numbers. Tell me about what then happens. What are the steps to make whatever it is you want to happen, and really fill it in. And I think we need to do that as local leaders. And sometimes we can be a little bit wafty. And we can be a little bit sort of waving the hands going, collaboration's great, and so on, and it is. Secondly, how do you simplify what you're trying to do and make it as easy to process and use? Because most people, and actually it's going to get more complicated as we get more mayors. We've got whatever the number is now, about 16. It's going to be up to about 20 in time, probably about 25. That is a lot of people to do business with. So we need to make our cases and the way that we talk about things as simple as possible and as consistent as possible, and repeat and repeat and repeat what we think is needed. And sometimes then it gets through. And I do think just on the mayors, it's the mayor is the currency of business in lots of parts of government now. And I think that's good because we didn't have a currency of business before. I don't think central government has worked out how to work with 12 cities at once or however many local authorities there are. So it's good to have it. It does make things quite complicated though, because the mayors, recognising the geographies they have, are carrying quite big and complex economies. Tracy Brabin is the mayor of Leeds, and she's also the mayor of Wakefield and of Bradford and of Calderdale and Kirklees. That is a rich and varied economy to think about, and it makes it harder sometimes, and I really recognise this, to have that sort of the simplicity of case and pull it back and say, all right, it's just this thing, it's just this thing. So I think sometimes as cities, we can support the mayors in having that simplicity, clarity, and also between us, and recognise the role that Kate's doing at the minute, chairing the Core Cities group of chief executives, working as cities, saying what happens if we all do similar things, because the scale is pretty good when you do join it all up.
I'm going to, I think, open up to questions. If anybody wants to raise anything or ask Ed or Kate.
Hi, I'm Janet Smith, Head of Sustainability for 2 NHS Trust. Just my question in terms of mitigation and adaptation of the climate change impact on what each city is doing about it and how you collaborate with each other in ensuring that the impact that we're currently experiencing and future impact is actually mitigated.
Yeah, sure. So I think we're all doing quite a lot, and this is where I think net zero and the climate mitigation adaptation debate becomes very real. It's sort of what are you actually doing with your infrastructure in your cities? In Leeds, we've done quite a lot on flood alleviation, flood defences, built a big flood defence just up the road from here, the other side of the city in Kirkstall. That is going to save tens of thousands of homes if we have a flood like we had in 2015. And we're going to do more of that, and we're changing the way that we think about the city, sort of flood defences and how water moves around the city. So we're doing a bit on the adaptation side. On the mitigation side, I think it's how each city has, and this is where we are collaborating and thinking about it, how do we move relentlessly towards cleaner air in our cities? And for some, that'll be a clean air zone. For others, you know, in Leeds, we've managed to make a big difference on air quality without doing a clean air zone. But we looked at it, and we'll stand with other cities that are doing that, and Bradford next door are, and some of the data on what it's meant for them is fantastic. So sort of some of it is saying, actually, where are the tangible steps you can take, and where do you want to work with one another? I think the other area where we've done a bit, I think we do a lot more, is retrofit and the housing stock, where in the north you've got this, everyone knows, you've got this real challenge of a lot of poor quality housing, but also housing that is just terrible in terms of heat retention and the climate impacts. Retrofit just solves so many of those things. So how combined authorities are working together and how local authorities are working together, I think we're probably going to do more of that as we go.
And I'll just give a bit of a shout out, partly because I can see her over there. So we're all also members of the Yorkshire and Humber Climate Commission, which I think is a unique thing at any regional level. It brings together not just local authorities, but business, communities, voluntary and charitable organisations, and is absolutely a way for us to collaborate around best practice, but also I think really more importantly to challenge ourselves and each other, which, you know, we are all needing when we think about both the climate and nature emergencies, to walk into spaces that are very novel and potentially to take risks, and also to do that in what is an increasingly contested political environment and public environment. And so I think it's really important that we have all, as Yorkshire authorities, bought into and support the Yorkshire and Humber Climate Commission, and also as core cities. And Pat started this, and I've been carrying it on. We've done a lot of work with the Connected Places Catapult, particularly around how we bring private investment into, again, not just net zero in terms of energy and retrofit, but also thinking about how we weave our responses around biodiversity and public realm and flood alleviation into that. So I think there's a really good story to tell. It's very complex, but if you're not part of the Yorkshire and Humber Climate Commission and you're from these parts, then there's a woman over there called Rosa who you should go and speak to.
Hi, Alex Dismore, Head of Strategy. We're a public affairs and policy consultancy. You both touched on the challenges of being asked to do more with less money, whether or not be housing or energy. Spending review coming up, what are you hoping will happen there, or perhaps not happen there?
Do you want to go on that?
I think what I'm hoping, I think there's a lot to be said for the conversations we need to have around single settlement at regional level, and I'm not naive. I've been around, and I'm still too friendly / married to people who are involved in the fiscal challenges that our country faces to be naive enough to think we're going to get a load of money. The big case I've been making is we need more flexibility, we need more trust, and we need resource, we need capability, we need human beings to do the work. So there's huge amounts of inefficiency built into the way that national government for a very long time has funded the public sector, and local authorities are no different. So my budget now in Sheffield, and I'm sure Ed's is the same, is about half of what it was in 2010. Half of what it was in 2010. I could say that a third time. It's absolutely bonkers. But given that it's not going to double in June, the question I have is how much of that half is spent administering oversubscribed, overdefined funds for very specific things that a minister in Whitehall's invented for some reason and which don't speak to the needs of our communities. So we're absolutely, I think, pushing for more flexibility, broader pots, a bit more of a move back to that total place sort of a model. And then on the big, on the big economic plays, again, we are really, again, shout out to this brochure in my hand. One of the things that the David Blunkett's work in Yorkshire around rail has done is really clearly prioritised and sequenced and said we recognise we don't have hundreds of billions to spend tomorrow, but if you've got a couple of billion, you could spend it on this and then on this and then on this. So I think it's about having that mature conversation about sequencing and being in the room. But it feels a very different spending review, not just because of the overarching constraints, but also because of the very positive conversation that our mayors and we are able to have with central government, which is vastly improved on previous spending reviews.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with all of that. And I think there's some technical changes to local government finance which will help us if it does happen. So Treasury have publicly talked about multi-year settlements for local government. That is just useful because, my goodness, the constant churn of when do you actually find out how much money you've got to run a city is quite exhausting for everyone. So having multi-year will be useful. Having a funding formula that we hope will recognise what is really going on in cities where deprivation lies, those kind of questions, that will also help a bit. But as Kate said, we're not going back to 2007. That's not going to happen. For me, another part of it is how do you grow the revenue base? So that's why the growth story is really critical. It bluntly gives us the money we need to fund our services that our cities need and our residents need. So that's part of the picture. And on that, I also hope that in the spending review, there should be, and through the industrial strategy, the infrastructure plan, the idea of saying these complementary strengths that the cities have in these different sectors, how can we accelerate those? So for each of us, it might look quite different, but we'd all like to be pushing along those sectors we have in our cities and growing those. And that, for me, is all about bringing back that sort of revenue that helps us fund the services.
I think there's also just something about, which links a bit to the previous question, about what national government is and can do to unlock private investment into our places. It's incredibly, we keep hearing about this wall of capital that exists somewhere. And I think in our cities, probably more than anywhere, we've done very detailed, very robust, high quality work to develop pipelines of investable propositions. But often the little bit that you need to get a project over the line, the bit of flexibility you need to trial something that might be novel isn't quite there. And I think that is something that's quite a mature conversation that we can be having with government. And I hope that even if all of that isn't laid out in the spending review, I hope that some of the frameworks that we're going to need to work in that different way will come through.
Yeah, I would support that. I think flexibility and innovation in the way that government can help unlock delivery on the ground will be really important. And
we haven't talked about housing yet, have we?
No, we haven't. No, I was going to kind of open it up towards, and I was going to do a little bit of, just from a Homes England point of view, that kind of facing into place and really kind of joining up what we do and hiding the wiring so that, we're investing in capacity and we bring various different tools and funds to the table to deliver in place is the way and the direction of travel that we're going. And a lot of it being influenced by the work we've done in Sheffield with Kate to help prioritisation and really kind of drive delivery. Also in Leeds, where we've had a kind of clear strategic vision that we've bought into and are putting people and investment into, and we can bring things like purchase of land and others, and that driver through strong regions will be where we'll focus in the future. And I'm hoping in the spending review to get the flexibility to allow us to do that in a more joined up way, but linked to people who are based in regions and are able to broker national programmes in a way that works for places.
I mean, some of the work that we've done in Sheffield with Homes England, I think, as well as being an exemplar of how this can be done, and certainly something that I know that the Minister and Pat and Eamon never really want to see replicated, has also really highlighted frankly the ridiculousness of some of the current structures. Tiny amounts of, relatively speaking, tiny amounts of money that don't quite fit the box of a particular thing, having to go through a months-long process to get somebody in Treasury who's actually relatively junior to say, okay, you can do that, when you've got Pat or you've got Peter Freeman or you've got teams of expert people saying this is a good thing to do. that shift has to change, because otherwise we're just wasting time, and the other thing we haven't got is time to faff around.
Anybody else? Any further questions that anybody wants to pick up on?
Just a quick follow-up. It's really good to hear that you're collaborating and doing something about sustainability and the climate impact of climate change. So just, I've always been curious on how you actually balance the need to look after climate, to look after nature, with the need to grow investment.
All right, how long have we got? So I think
There's a thesis in this.
there's a thesis in this. I mean, I think there's a degree to which having the transparency and accountability, and again, thanking Rosa and the team for ensuring we have both of those across the Yorkshire authorities, of saying what are you trying to do on net zero and what are you trying to do on investment. That's the first way that you just reconcile where there are tensions. You reconcile that because you can say, what am I trying to achieve? So that transparency, I think, is critical for all the cities. The other bit is also, and this is obvious but important, looking for the opportunities where you can move the ball along on both. Down the road, most of you will have been to it, I'm sure, the Situ Climate Innovation District. I mean, I've been in some of those houses, and I don't think that you could light a match in there and heat the house for about a week. It is completely remarkable what they're doing, and actually those houses are incredibly attractive propositions to live in Leeds, and they want to build more of them. So they're not having to go to the Department for Net Zero to get funding for it. They are looking to build more, and they have demand. So I think for us as local authorities, a little bit in the market shaping role that we have on transport, on housing, how can we ensure that we're embedding both values in what we're doing, but also recognising that without the transparency on both of those measures, you know, it'll be hard to tell whether we are holding them both. But in a way, you've highlighted, I think, one of the singular challenges we have as local authorities is holding a balance across a lot of different objectives.
Okay. Do you want to add? I was going to do one final. No. Well, just before we kind of wind up, I wonder, both of you talked at the beginning about being brought up in Sheffield and Leeds and how passionate you are, both head and heart, for, you know, the difference that can be made. If you could talk to your 17-year-old self and say, going forward, this is the difference I will have made to you. If you were 17 in 30 years' time, what would things look how would things look different, and how would it mean that you would stay? Just kind of relate it to you.
So it's imagining we're 17 now.
Yeah.
Okay. Right.
And
yeah.
Yourself,
This is a big thought experiment for us.
This is a scary. As a parent of teenagers, can I opt?
No.
So
You're selling it. To
yeah.
the
Okay.
17-year-olds.
So full disclosure, I should be clear. I grew up in Doncaster, so I'm a Donny girl. But Sheffield is my home city, and I apologise because I know Doncaster is a city now. But if you grew up in Donny in the 90s, then Sheffield was where you went for to experience the big lights. I will say, if I could talk to my actual 17-year-old self back then, she would be like, what are you, like, how on earth is this even possible? And I think that is one thing that's quite important, that we are always, always, always humble about, where we've come from and what we can contribute. I guess what I would want to say, this is I can't get my head around, don't blame the lawyers. I think what I'd want to be able to say is that we did the best that we could, and that we were honest and we were brave. And I think in public service, we don't know how long we have, right? You're sort of, you don't know how long you'll have before you pass the baton on, but you are always passing the baton on. The work is never done. You are always trying to make things better. And so for me, the key thing is that we leave things better than we found them. And in our places, I think the biggest thing is about harnessing the ambition and the energy and the potential of our places, and putting in places changes that perhaps, 20, 30 years ago, in the 80s and 90s in Sheffield, my predecessors built a tram system. They built the country's largest district heat network. They invested in culture. They invested in a municipal recording studio, out of which, the electronic music and the art that Sheffield's so famous for came. They invested in a city centre transformed. Those things are still part of our identity. And so I hope that I and the team and some of the colleagues in the room, I know that what we feel passionate about is the idea that in 20, 30 years' time, people will look back and say, you know, they took an opportunity and they were brave. Yeah. So that'll be it, really.
Yeah. Thank you.
I mean, I didn't quite expect the session to end here. 'Cause suddenly I'm sort of back into being a skinny, spotty, slightly greasy nerd, feeling a little bit shy about the world. So let's try step out of that for a second. I think a couple of things. So firstly, if you were to say at that point, you're going to spend the afternoon standing next to the trophy that the club has won to get to the Premiership as a Leeds fan, I would have been like, that's it, my life is done, this is great, I can retire now. So
playoffs at the weekend.
Bring it on. So
we're definitely not going to football, or we'll be getting into the Toon next and in the proper league and all.
Sure. Well done, fine. But I think there is something in that. So I want to hold on to that sense of when you do these jobs, particularly when it's somewhere you grew up or knew, the sense of childlike joy sometimes you get of going, I've seen what this was in the 90s, whatever it was. I see what it is now, and I get to be part of where it goes next. If you'd have sold that to me when I was 17, I'd have fallen over. It would have been amazing. So holding on to that childlike sense of just excitement and possibility, that's what gets you out of bed in the morning. It does for me. The other bit that I noticed, actually going back to the specific question, I think, is a couple of weeks ago, I joined the Ahead Partnership, who do really good stuff in Leeds around skills and getting people into workplaces. It's called Girl Tech. It was for year 8 girls around Leeds, and they got companies from all around the city in. And the girls would go around each stall, they talk to the companies, they see the products, they have conversations about, this is the career you could have. I realised, I had quite a privileged upbringing. I never had that growing up. I never had a set of companies in Leeds saying to me, we'd love it if you worked for us one day. I never had that sense of, here's what I could do after university or straight into company, whatever it might be. So I think that sense that has changed in those intervening many years, seeing where you could be and looking at it and going, I could do that. For me, I didn't have that. And now people do. And as a local authority, we need to do more of that. So I think that sense of how you can inspire that. And if I were saying to my 17-year-old self, stay in Leeds, I'd just talk about the stuff that you can end up doing. You can work with all these different companies, for all these different companies, doing stuff that genuinely involves new discovery, helping people, making Leeds an amazing place to live and work and travel, all those things. And you get to do it in a city that is big, but it's not so big you feel anonymous or you feel lonely. You can do it with people around you. And I think Leeds, Sheffield both have this sense of being big enough to do stuff, but small enough that you can be part of something. And if I were selling it to my 17-year-old self now, I'd say, that thing, you can be part of something big, but you can also feel like you've got a bunch of mates around you doing that. And I think that might have worked, but I don't know.
Brilliant. A good question. I'm going to remember that question for future. Anyway, can I really thank both Kate and Ed for what I think has been a great session, and the vision really, and the absolute collaboration, and the fact you like each other, I think is really great, and that kind of comes over. So thank you. Can we say thanks to you?